let's begin by summarizing the main points about the mitzvah of Kiddush min Torah that we discussed 2 weeks ago. We started with the Gemara in Brachos and Daf Chaf Amid Beis. The Gemara there says that Noshim, that women are obligated in Kiddush Dvar Torah, which obviously means that men are obligated Dvar Torah. The Kiddush is that the way Rav interprets it, even though it's a mitzvah seishas man grama and women should be pturos, but nevertheless they're chayavos because of the hekesh between shomer and zachar. Kol sheyeshno b'shmira yeshno b'schira. So both men and women are obligated in the mitzvah DeOraisa of Kiddush. We also mentioned that there seemed to be a group of Rishonim, which I'd like to study on a different occasion, that hold that not only is Kiddush and the recitation of Kiddush DeOraisa, but even the drinking of the yayin is DeOraisa. And the one who champions that shita is the Ritva, but it really dates back to Rashi and to the Mefarish in Nazir and other Rishonim, but that's a separate topic. But certainly the basic mitzvah of Kiddush as an Amiras Dvarim is DeOraisa according to all Rishonim, even without yayin. And the question is, what is that Kiddush DeOraisa? What are the requirements or the elements that go into Kiddush DeOraisa? And what I want to discuss with you today is the Rashba, because I think the Rashba really takes this question and really analyzes it. So if you have this kuntris, which David was kind enough to put on the group, so you could turn to page Yud Zayin, and I hope you'll find Shuta Rashba. Now, what's interesting here is to begin with the question that was asked to the Rashba, and that is that there seems to be a stira between the Gemara Brachos that we mentioned earlier, that Kiddush is DeOraisa, and that's on Daf Chaf Amid Beis. But if we fast forward to another Gemara in Brachos on Daf Lamed Gimel, so we're really just fast forwarding 13 blots, and there the Gemara in a parak called Ein Omdim establishes that Kiddush is a takonas anshe knesset gdola. So the Shol says, how can I reconcile these two? The Sugya Daf Chaf postulates that Kiddush is DeOraisa, and the Sugya Daf Lamed Gimel explicitly says that Kiddush was established by the Anshe Knesset Gdola, which means it's only DeRabanan. And this was the question that was posed probably about 9 centuries ago to the Rashba. Furthermore, the Shoel points out that the Gemara in Nazir on Daf Gimel Amid Beis establishes that yayin of Kiddush is yayin shel mitzvah. And not only that, the Gemara goes even further and says that it's mushpa v'yomid b'har Sinai, which means that the Shoel fits into that pattern that I mentioned earlier of those Rishonim who maintain that even Kiddush al yayin is DeOraisa. But one thing is clear, that Kiddush is DeOraisa. And that's why the mitzvah of Kiddush would trump the Isur Shtiyas Yayin of a Nazir. How do you reconcile that with the Gemara in Perek Ein Omdim that establishes that Kiddush was an invention of the Anshe Knesset Gdola? And I'm fascinated by the tshuva of the Rashba for 2 reasons. First of all, it really puts these two sugyas into perspective. And secondly, I think it gives us a derech halimud, really gives us a method of how to learn Torah. Says the Rashba that there's no question about it. Kiddush is DeOraisa. Zocher es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho is a mitzvah like any other mitzvah. No one would question that. Lo nechlak adam b'davar zeh. The sugya in Perek Ein Omdim, Amar Rab Chia, etc., Amar Rab Yochanan, Anshe Knesset Gdola Tiknu Lem Yisrael Brachos Utfilos Kiddushos Vavdolos. meaning brachos, like for example, Birkas Hamazon, Tfilos, for example, the Shmon Esrei, Kiddushos, meaning Kiddush, and Avdolos, which is Avdolah. Says the Rashba al Karchin, we have no choice, since we know that Kiddush is DeOraisa, but to assume that Lav Ikran Shel Dvarim Mamish Ka'omar. The Rashba introduces a term called Ikran, and he says the following, that the Gemara on Daf Lamed Gimel in Brachos Perkei Omdim is not addressing Ikran Shel Dvarim, Ikran Shel Dvarim. And what that means is the Ikar Chiyuv. Where is the Ikar Chiyuv, for example, of Birkas Hamazon? Obviously, it's in the Torah, V'yachalta v'savata irachta. And even with regard to Tefillah, the Torah says, V'avadetem es Hashem Elokeichem. So the obligation of Tefillah is clearly DeOraisa. That's called the Ikran Shel Dvarim. And in the case of Kiddushos, which means Kiddush, once again, the Ikran Shel Dvarim is DeOraisa. That cannot be the subject of the formulation of Rabbi Chia in Brachos Lamed Gimel. If we're talking about the bracha that we recite after eating, when we're satiated, that can't be an invention of the Anshe Knesses Hagadola. And even with regard to the bracha Lachrea, the bracha Lefanea, according to one opinion in the Gemara, that also is a mitzvah DeOraisa, Perketzad Mevarchim, derived from Kodesh Ilulim Lashem. And if you're going to tell me maybe the word brachos here is not referring to Birkas Hamazon, which is clearly DeOraisa, what about Birkas HaTorah? Well, guess what? Birkas HaTorah is also DeOraisa, argues the Rashba. Midechsiv, we derive it from Kishem Hashem Ekra, Havu Godel Leilokenu, a pasuk in Dvarim Lamed Beis that is derived, that the Gemara in Brachos Chaf Aleph derives from that Birkas HaTorah is DeOraisa. Ella, and here's the breakthrough of the Rashba. I call this pre-brisk, meaning he's only about, shall we say, 7.5 centuries before Reb Chaim Brisker, but he's a Brisker. Tzvei Dinim. And he says the following. Ikran Dvar Torah, the fundamental obligation, whether it's brachos, whether it's tfilos, whether it's kiddushos, whether it's something, that's all DeOraisa, Dvar Torah. And that is explicit both in the Gemara in Brachos Taf Chaf and in the Gemara in Nazir Gimel Amid Beis, Mushpa v'Ovi Me'ar Sinai, with regard to the Kiddush of Yayin. But Nusach HaBrachos Umekomon, now we'll come back to this word Mekomon in just a minute, but Nusach HaBracha Mitakones Anshe Knesset Gedola. So we differentiate between the bare bones mitzvah, which is DeOraisa, as opposed to the dressed up mitzvah with all the fanfare of a nusach. That's the Rabbanan and Takonas Anshe Knesset Gedola. And I believe that the word makomon here means that where and when do we recite these brachos? For example, we have a principle in Kiddush, ein Kiddush el b'makom suda. So the makom for Kiddush is makom suda. That's already Anshe Knesset Gedola. When the Anshe Knesset Gedola established the nusach, they also established the makom. Or, for example, you might ask, should Kiddush be recited as part of Tefillah? Should Havdalah, for example, be recited as part of Tefillah? Or no, maybe Havdalah and Kiddush should be recited over a cup way after Tefillah. All that is in the domain of the Anshe Knesset Gedola. But the Ikar mitzvah, meaning the mitzvah DeOraisa, if you strip it down to its bare bones, that is DeOraisa in brachos. We gave examples of Birkas Hamazon, or bracha lefanei, according to one day, certainly Birkas HaTorah, and Kiddush, Zochres, Yom HaShabbos, L'Kach, that's all DeOraisa. However, if you ask where, when, and how, the details, the nuances, and especially the nusach, that's already in the hands of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, as the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Chia in Perek Ein Omdim. V'chein Kiddush Hayom, Lizkar also b'knisaso, ke'ein shevach v'kilus. Now here, we want to take a break and underline two very critical words here in the Rashba. And the Rashba is telling you, what is the bare basic mitzvah DeOraisa of Kiddush? And he gives you two words. Number one, shevach, and number two, kilus. I suspect that these two words are pretty much synonymous. Perhaps the difference is that shevach is just a basic praise, whereas kilus is on a much more lofty, sophisticated level. And now the Rashba is going to prove that this mitzvah DeOraisa of Kiddush, which is divrei shevach v'kilus, was actually described in the Gemara. And where is this Gemara? As he points out here in the note, this is a Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Yutes that tells us that Rabbi Chanina, when he was Makabel Shabbos, he would go out and with his Talmidim Neitzei in a Kabel Pnei Shabbos Malkusa. He described Shabbos as a Malka, as a queen. V'yamakales v'yomer. Now we get to the higher level, more sophisticated, lofty level of Shevach, which is called Kilus. Boi chala, boi chala. Now, it's not only did he describe Shabbos as a kala, but he actually invited the kala in. Like if you have a chuppah and the chassan invites the kala, boi chala. Not only that, kayotze bazeh, there are other examples of divrei shevach v'kilus. The kriyas psuke kedushas Shabbos, when you recite the psukim that describe the special sanctity of the Shabbos. For example, kriyas vayachulu, which means that God completed the process of creation and then sanctified the Shabbos. Over Shomer Neisel Shabbos, that we observe the Shabbos. V'chayotze be'elu. And now I want you to underline the next few words. V'kol echad v'echad omer kefi sheyizdamein lo min yodei shvacho kedushaso v'azkaras kedushaso. Guess what, says the Rashba? It's a free-for-all. Take out your pen and paper and write a liturgical poem describing the greatness and the sanctity of Shabbos. Become a poet. Each and every one of us, in a subjective way, will describe the greatness of Shabbos in our own words, using our own vocabulary. There's no standard nusach. That is Kiddush DeOraisa. Kol echad v'echad kefi sheyizdamein lo min yonei shvacho kedushasa. We have finally found a very precise definition of Kiddush DeOraisa. V'tiknu. However, even though each person individually could fulfill his mitzvah of Kiddush with his own words, his own flowery language, nevertheless, the Chazal, meaning the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, made a takana, and they required what's called an akitas chayfetz, which is a term that's borrowed from Hilchos Shavuos. It means he has to take a kos of yayin and pas, or alternatively, pas lechem. And why did they make such a takana? Why didn't they leave it to each individual to come up with his personal nusach of tefillah, of sheva? And says the Rashba, bo heim v'tiknu lakol. Nusach echad. There has to be some sort of unity, some sort of echad. B'makom suda. And not only that, they wanted to be in a specific place. They added this condition of makom suda ubechefetz, and taking into the hand either a cup of wine or a pas. V'tiknu, and they made the takana that mitzvah DeOraisa of hazkaras kedushasa should be ala yayin. And what motivated them to add yayin into the equation? Lefisha ein omrim shira Ela al yayin. We have a principle in the Gemara in Brachos Daf Lamed Hey that words of Shira should be al yayin. Now there are exceptions to that rule. For example, Hallel or Psukei the Zimra, which are words of Shevach, are not recited over a cup of yayin. However, we do have Hallel on Leila Pesach with a special cup. One of the Dalit Kosos, in this case the last of the four, was established on the Hallel. But during the year, Hallel is a kiyum of Tefillah, and Psukei Zimra is established within the framework of Tefillah, and if we don't take a kos of yayin. But if it's outside the framework of Tefillah, ein shir el yayin. What is the source for ein shir el yayin? Obviously, the Gemara Brachos that we mentioned, but where does it come from? Do we have a Levi in the audience? Okay, Leviim are quite rare these days. Anyway, the Leviim sang during the Nisuch HaYayin, and the Shira of the Leviim was related to Nisuch HaYayin. V'tiknu laskiru b'tfilah. They established that, number one, we should fulfill that nusach that is organized as part of tefillah. But not only that, in the case of Birkas HaMazon, they established that there should be a bracha revius, and that's all part of the four brachos that make up Birkas HaMazon. So we have here a breakthrough shita of the Rashba, kind of two dimensions to the mitzvah of Kiddush. One is DeOraisa, and the other was established by the Anshe Knesset HaGadol. The impression you get, and tell me if you agree with me, because I want to build on this, is that according to the Rashba, there is such a thing as Kiddush of Shevach V'Odaya without a Makom Suda, without a Koshel Yayin, in which, or by which, we fulfill a mitzvah DeOraisa of Zochres Yom HaShabbos HaKadsha. What is my point? My question is as follows. Today, Bizman Hazeh, on Friday night, I described the Shabbos verbally, in my own words. Kilus, Shevach, beautiful. But I don't recite those words b'makom suda, nor do I recite those words over a cup of wine. What would be my status? Joe, what do you say?
I'm sorry, again, can you say that again? Sorry.
Again, today, this Friday night, right? Today's Wednesday, a little bit more than 48 hours here on our clock. I come to shul on Friday night. I recite beautiful words of Shevach V'Odaya, of Kilus on the Shabbos. It was not b'makom suda, nor did I recite it over a cup of wine. Is that, how would you evaluate or define what I have either achieved or not achieved through those words of Kilus and Shevach?
I'll preempt Joe. Theoretically, I would say you should be Yaitse your key of DeRaisa. But
wait, when you say theoretically, Bobby, I'm talking about the Rashba now. What did you see in the Rashba? That's what I'm asking. I want to know if
I would say that once there's a matbeya shatovu chachamim of that the Anshe Knesset HaGadol said this is how you do Kiddush.
Where do you see that, Bobby, in the Rashba? I didn't see that in the Rashba. I saw in the Rashba that the Rabbanan made a takana. Number one, recite Kiddush as Kilus and Shevach in Tefillah. I'll read it to you in a minute inside. We just read it before. And then the Rabbanan had an additional takana of a second Kiddush. The Rashba never indicates that the mitzvah DeOraisa was not fulfilled. Take a look in the Rashba. The Rashba's language is V'tiknu nusach b'makom suda etc. Netilas chayfetz, and he says the following: Tiknu laskiru b'tefillah. In other words, what the Anshe Knesset HaGadol wanted to do was, number one, to get a nusach echad, because they wanted to enhance the mitzvah, meaning let's not rely on Berzon, on Zeifman, and everybody in their own individual way to come up with that nusach. let's get together a definite nusach. For example, in Tefillah, the Anshe Knesset Gedolah did the exact same thing. They were worried about the Ilgim, who were incapable of formulating the Tefillah. They didn't have the sophistication that was necessary. But the mitzvah DeOraisa can be fulfilled through any Tefillah, maybe even through Shevach and Hodaya. However, the Rabbanan wanted to build a second Kiddush in addition to the Kiddush in Tefillah, in which case you would yotze the bare bones mitzvah d'oraisa of Zochar Yom Shabbos HaKadsho. The Rashba never goes ahead and says matbeah shetovu chachamim. But I do want to say this, that Bobby is right, but I don't believe it's the Rashba. It never dawned on the Rashba, in my humble opinion, nobody has to agree with me, that the Rabbanan now undermined and negated, or shall we say invalidated, the mitzvah d'oraisa of Kiddush. They only enhanced the mitzvah of Kiddush. However, Bobby is right according to the Minchas Chinuch. So what I'd like to do now with you is turn backwards to page Yud Beis in your Kuntrus. Just 1 second. Sorry, in your Kuntrus it's Yud Gimel. In my Kuntrus it's Yud Beis. I have the first edition. Sell it on eBay. Anyway, so take a look at the Minchas Chinuch. The shifty organization of the Lakewood Yeshiva is very, very nice to us. And they put these pointers there. Do you see the pointer? He says Vida, and it's so fascinating to me that the Minchas Chinuch is writing this on his own without reference to the Rashba. It's like Shnei Nevi'im Misnavim B'Signan Echad. Just the Minchas Chinuch was about 700 years after the Rashba. And he says the following, Dada mitzvah Torah, Lomar or Ledaber, he says, Dvarim shel kavod hayom. Speak about the greatness, the dignity, the special uniqueness of the day. And that's the mitzvah in Torah, implying that that's not the mitzvah DeRabanan. Kol echad, look how similar to the language of the Rashba. Kol echad lefi tzachas l'shono. Each person, according to the ability that he has to express the dignity, the greatness of the day. The nusach HaKiddush ain't min Torah. No doubt he has in mind the Gemara Daf Lamed Gimel of Rabbi Chia that the Anshe Knesset Gedolah established the mitzvah of Kiddush. What mitzvah of Kiddush? Kiddush is DeOraisa. I don't need the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, but the answer is the nusach of Kiddush. V'zeh tiknu Anshe Knesset Gedolah kemuvur bebrachas perkei nomdim Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph v'gam sheyeh bebracha b'shem u'malchus. We want a nusach habracha. Avol min Torah. Omer kol echad lefi ma sheyirtzeh, lefi ma sherotze. Does he need a nusach ha'achid, which is, does he need a bracha b'shem u'malchus? Ha'ikar shetzarach lahaskir malas hayom. Speak about the greatness of the day. V'cheinu b'rishonim gabi birkas hamazon shumin haTorah and beis Yosef l'tur orchaim reish simon kuf peizai b'shem Rashba. Probably means our Rashba. V'rosh b'brachos. Daf memches. The birchas hamazon hi min Torah. Avol hamatbeah eino min Torah. Matbeah meaning the nusach, as Bobby mentioned before. V'hachinami here in Kiddush, v'zeh pasha. So the Minchas Chinuch has established, which we already saw in the Rashba, a perfect parallel, an analogy between Birchas HaMazon, wherein the mitzvah is DeOraisa, but the nusach and the matbeah was established by Anshe Knesset Gedolah, and Kiddush, where the nusach is DeRabanan established, but the mitzvah itself, or what he calls the ikar mitzvah, is DeOraisa. The Ayin Shagis Aryeh, etc. Ach ata, the word ata is critical, because at this juncture, the Minchas Chinuch wants to know exactly what I asked you before. What happens today if someone recites his own Kiddush with beautiful words of Shevach, Vodoya, and Kilus? Shetiknu Chazal nusach Tahainu lahastil v'shemu malchus u'lisayim. So you have a psicha and a chasima. V'hu lo asa ken. Chak omar dvar me'atzmo. What we call tzachas l'shono. L'kfi kol echad v'echad. L'mayla sayom. Efshar. See, even the Minchas Chinuch is not totally convinced. She'af min Torah lo yotza. Hey, this has to be underlined. Sorry. I got to take a break for a second. Af min Torah lo yotza. This is an absolute pellet. I mean, Bobby said it kelachar yad as if it was simple. I don't see it as simple. I'm going to fight you on this tooth and nail. What do you mean? I did and implemented a mitzvah DeOraisa, now you're taking it away from me? Do the Anshe Knesset Gedola have the authority to rip out a mitzvah DeOraisa and invalidate it? Now, I admit that this past Rosh Hashanah, on the first day, we didn't take the shofar. But that's something else. That's called Yesh Kof B'Yad Chachomim Lakar Dovin Ator B'Shevi Al Taseh. I understand. The Chachomim could say, sit tight in your seat and don't fulfill the mitzvah shofar. And don't take the lulav on the first day, which is Shabbos. That they can do. Shevi Al Taseh. But I went ahead and I fulfilled the mitzvah DeOraisa. Mehechetesi. Where does the Minchas Chinuch come off? Chutz b'noira, pardon the expression, to tell me that the Rabbanan negated and invalidated my mitzvah, which the Torah recognized as a mitzvah DeOraisa, Zachras Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. So the Minchas Chinuch makes an attempt to prove this from the Gemara. This is the Gemara Beis Hillel Beit Shammai regarding the mitzvah of Sukkah. And the question is, if he has his body in the sukkah, he has his shulchan outside the sukkah, and the question is, can he be yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah? And the Gemara's language seems to indicate that when the Rabbanan established that the shulchan has to be in the sukkah, if you eat in the sukkah and your shulchan is outside the sukkah, lo kiyeh mitzvah sukkah b'yoma. And I would add to the Minchas Chinuch, very humbly, the Gemara in Brachos about Kriyat Shema. You remember that there's machlokas Beis Hillel Beit Shammai about B'shal b'chav kumecha, and Beit Shammai took it literally that you have to be reclining for the Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis. You have to be standing b'kumecha in a standing position for the Kriyat Shema Shel Shacharis. And Beis Hillel says no. What is B'shal b'chav bisman shchiva? What is b'kumecha bisman kima? And the Gemara establishes that if somebody would stand up in the morning to recite Kriyat Shema, or someone would recline in the evening to recite Kriyat Shema, in order to fulfill Beit Shammai, lo yatsa yedei chovas. According to the Torah, B'shal b'cha means zman shchiva, b'kumecha zman kima. You can read Kriyat Shema in any position you choose. And therefore, if he stood up in the morning or reclined in the evening on a DeOraisa level, he has fulfilled his chiyuv. And yet the Gemara says that the Rabbanan were mafkia the mitzvah. And we see something amazing from all these sugyas and the way that the Minchas Chinuch applies to Kiddush, that the Rabbanan have the authority. I don't know where it comes from, honestly. The authority to take a mitzvah DeOraisa and rip it to shreds. Joe,
could you not say that we're talking about different aspects in this case, in those cases? In other words, there was a machlokas on how to achieve the mitzvah, and we have a concern of maybe not doing it right, of machlokas within Bnei Yisrael. So we have to set up a thing. What's the terminology when you're in a klal and you go against against everybody? That's that's an issue.
Yeah, what?
Yes, please, thank you. But this is not necessarily the same thing. The way the Rav's explaining it to us, they're only giving us a direction on how to, so we can feel comfortable in achieving the mitzvah. It's not like there's a machlokus involved. Why would you say why?
But Joe, do you agree to the following principle? The Rabbanan could take a Maisa Mitzvah DeOraisa, which has a Kiyum DeOraisa, and just nullify it. And you're saying they'll
Shev al Taseh they can do. Yeah, we know that, right?
No, I'm not talking about Shev al Taseh. Shev al Taseh means don't do the mitzvah. I'm talking about someone who went ahead, implemented the mitzvah, fulfilled the mitzvah to the T, the way the Torah described it. Do the Rabbanan have the authority to say that mitzvah is meaningless? You have not fulfilled your mitzvah. Go sit in Sukkah again. Go read Kriyat Shema again. Go recite Kiddush again. You have not fulfilled your mitzvah. Do they have such authority?
They do, but what they're saying is
stop there, Jay.
But they're not saying
when you say they do in my books. Again, you can ask them why they did it and when they did it, machlokes and parshman. You can give all the explanations in the world,
but they're not saying
they do it. But you have agreed to me that they have the authority to do so, to nullify a mitzvah DeOraisa. I don't know where that comes from.
They're not nullifying it. They're just
my problem, not the MInchas problem.
But they're not nullifying it. They're just defining it. So they're saying
no. They're nullifying. I went ahead and I recited Kiddush. Kitzachos Lashoni. I'm a great liturgist. I've written poems. I've published them. I was thinking of writing a kinnah for what happened on Shabbos of Shmini Atzeres, because more people died on Shabbos of Shmini Atzeres than died in what's it called, Speyer, for which we say a kinnah mi'itein Rosh Hashanah during the Crusades. I think the number there was 1,023. We surpassed that number. Okay, but anyway, I got off on a tangent because there are a lot of things on my mind these days, as you can imagine. Like my son doesn't want to tell me where he is, or what elite unit he's in. But anyway, that's not here or there. What I wanted to... What?
HaMelech HaKodesh. You daven Shmoneh Esrei, and they tell you, no, you got to go back because you didn't do it according to what we told you have to do. Were you Yaitzi or DeRaisa the Kachiv?
I think yes, for sure. I would say that even if you didn't say Shmoneh Esrei at all, you were Yaitzi or DeRaisa.
Right, I understand. That's
no, but Bobby, I think you and Joe are missing my feeling here. I mean, again, I'm sure there are greater people that you could quote, greater than me, that feel absolutely comfortable about this. I personally feel very uncomfortable about it. But again, I want to just read to you the language here of the Minchas Chinuch. He says, "De kol makom de tiknu chazal b'mitzvah DeOraisa." Now, I would add two words here just for clarification. I'm not trying to change the text. I'll read it like this: "De kol makom shetiknu chazal b'mitzvah DeOraisa ech lekaima." If you would allow me to add those two words, just for elaboration. V'hulo osaken lo yotza klal. Klal. He felt that Berzon was in the audience, and so he added the word klal. Listen, Berzon. Lo yotza klal. Forget about whether he has to recite Kiddush again. That's upgrade. But lo yotza klal. And I asked myself the question, how could the Rabbanan do such a thing? What power do they have? Again, if the Rabbanan want to tell me don't fulfill a mitzvah, v'shev al taseh nicha. But where did the Chacham have a koach to say lo yotza klal? And I would say that the Rashba never went that far. The Rashba was only talking about adding a mitzvah, adding a Kiddush. You have the Kiddush and Tefillah, which is Divrei Shevach V'Odaya, Kilus, or alternatively, Kol Echad V'Echad L'Fi Mashi is Damelo, and you have a Kiddush DeRabanan, which will enhance the mitzvah, but we're not coming to undermine and claim, according to the Rashba, that lo yotza klal. At least I didn't see it in the language of the Rashba. But I have no doubt that that's what the Minchas Chinuch is saying. In the middle, between these two polar extremes, we have a Pri Megadim. But I'm going to ask you, after I read the next line in the Minchas Chinuch, he quotes the Pri Megadim. I'm going to ask you, which camp does he belong to? Does he belong to the Rashba's camp or to the Minchas Chinuch's camp? And he writes the following: I am Pri Megadim arachayim psicha koleles. Dim asa b'mezid lo yotza klal, uba ones yotza min haTorah. The Pri Megadim also says lo yotza klal, but at the same time, the Pri Megadim says yotza min haTorah. How can it be both? It depends. If he was a mezid, lo yotza klal. If he was an ones, yotza min haTorah. The man has no yain. I'll go even a step further. He has no suda. What do you tell a Jew who's out there in the machnos, in the camps? Today, camps means the camps of the army, but I'm talking about the camps, during the war, during World War II. He has no access to suda. He's lucky if he gets a scrape of the outside of a potato peel. He has no mokum suda. He has no yain, no batir. Are you going to tell him, says the Pri Megadim, that he cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush? Oh no. Who's going to be excluded from the mitzvah of Kiddush? Mezid. And I ask the following question: if the Rabbanan have the power, like the Minchas Chinuch argues, to undermine and invalidate a mitzvah DeOraisa, then even in a case of ones, with all due respect, but you didn't fulfill the mitzvah because you didn't do it kimat be'esh al chachamim. If on the other hand the Rabbanan don't have the authority to do so, then how could it be that in a case of Mezid, we patch him on the hand because he's not a good boy, and we all of a sudden, poof, we invalidate a mitzvah DeOraisa. The Pri Megadim seems to be what we call in Yiddish nishtaher or nishtahin, or nishtahin and nishtaher, depending upon whether you're a Litvak or a Hungarian. Okay? David, you keep smiling. I like that. That smile is almost pasted to your face.
I would say that's all
hey,
part
there he is. And with a smile. Yeah.
I would say that's all part of the Chachamim, the power of the Chachamim is to say, look, we have a matbeah that we're setting up for you.
Right.
But if you're in an oinus situation, we understand and we accept that you can, you go back to the basic DeOraisa, which is say it in your own way. But if you're in a position where you're saying it, you could say it properly, and you amaze it, you say, I'm not going to use that lashon of the Chachamim. They have the power to say, you know what, you're not yotza because you did not go in accordance with with
Bobby. In the framework of the Pri Megadim, what word do you want to add? It's a 3-letter word to describe the case of Mezid. Lo yotza klal. I'm not asking for rocket science. It's just a simple word.
Not sure I understand the question. In other words,
whenever you see the word Mezid in Shas, followed by the fact that they disqualified him or penalized him, what's that called? Starts with a kuf.
Knas.
Excellent. It's a knas.
Uh-huh.
Now, this is a fascinating idea. I've heard of a knas in many cases. There are knasos that are DeOraisa. There are knasos that are DeRabanan. The Gemara says in Baba Basra that the Chachamim could establish the shar, meaning that you can't charge more than this, you can't pay less than that, or for hiring workers, you can't pay them more because that's going to push out the other workers, blah, blah, blah. And the Gemara says there that if he violates the Takanas Chachamim, they instituted a knas. The Gemara in Shabbos says if you cook on Shabbos, then they instituted knas. You're not allowed to eat the product of a chil shab. There are many, many knasos. It could be that Edom Zomim is a knas. It could be that Hezek Shein and Nikar is a knas. I mean, for those who are learning the Daf Yomi. And there are many, many cases of knas. But where do we find a precedent that because of a knas, they canceled your mitzvah? A mitzvah which you fulfilled to the T according to the Torah law. Brand new concept of knas. We pat you on the hand, and we say you deliberately violated the matbeah, the takonas chacham, the anshe knesset gdola, magil lecha knas. And because magil lecha knas, we're going to invalidate your mitzvah of Kiddush. That's a major jump. But if you ask me fundamentally, without knas, in which league does the Pri Megadim, to which league does he belong? I would say he belongs to the Rashba, not to the MInchas. But there's a new halach of knas. But the mitzvah DeOraisa remains in place. And therefore, if he was a shogeg, he was an onus, even though he did not fulfill Kiddush, kihilchasa kifi takonas anshe knesset gedola yotza yedei chovas mitzvahs Kiddush DeOraisa. And now there's a new halach of knas. How that halach of knas operates, I do not know. And again, if you gentlemen want to help me out with this, if you could ask your local Orthodox rabbi or your local Talmid Chacham, I know there's a great Talmid Chacham who says the Daf Yomi Shir. Maybe you could ask for me and get back to me either during the week through this or that or WhatsApp, whatever, or next week, and tell me how that works. The MInchas has pointed out that time after time after time, you see that the Chachamim could negate a mitzvah DeOraisa. You see, according to Pri Megadim, that with a knas, they could undermine a mitzvah DeOraisa. How does that work? I fail to see how that works.
I assume you can't say mitzvah baba vera.
No, I don't think so. Mitzvah baba vera means I have a stolen lulav, and I want to use a stolen lulav for a mitzvah.
In other words, you have an isser loisasur, and you
again,
say
loisasur means you're not allowed to do that, but
just you would still be yaitza. You're saying,
yeah. And according to Minchas Chinuch, even if you were onus, you aren't yotze. Filei plan. I mean, call him a violator of loisasur when he was onus. But that's it. The Rabbanan completely changed the nature of the mitzvah, and it no longer exists. It's a peloton. All right, Rabbosai, I know that, Bobby, you have to leave, and Bruce already left. Maybe in the last few minutes, we could do one more, achieve one more thing. And that is, I had two things on the agenda, but maybe we'll look at the Magen Avraham. It's on your page, Yud Ches. And Blinetta will fill in the missing pages next week. And this is the Magen Avraham. In the old version, it's on page Zayin. You see the pointer on top? There are many pointers. There are 3 pointers on this page. We're looking at the pointer on top. So you're on page Zayin. You're able to get that? He says, V'nira li, DeOraisa b'kiddush ha'omer b'tfila sagi. Doesn't this sound like the Rashba? Meaning, you don't need a special bracha midoraisa. You don't need a matbeya shetavu anshe knesset gedola midoraisa. In tefillah, you sing the song of praise of Shabbos. If I have another minute, I'm going to get my siddur and I'm going to read to you what we say in Arvis about the Shabbos. We call it the day of Menucha and day of Kiddusha and Hakadosh Zeichel Ma'aseh, whatever we say over there. I'll get a tefillah, siddur. Sagi, that's enough. And he's talking halach l'maisa, by the way. He's saying that once I fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush DeOraisa and tefillah, I was yotzei. The kroksiv zochras yom HaShabbos. V'arei zocharosa. He fulfilled his mitzvah of zechira. The Torah doesn't say anything about makom suda. The Torah doesn't say anything about a matbeah. The Torah doesn't say anything about yayin, garnished. The oso Kiddush b'makom suda Rabbanan tiknu. Okay, so it's a Rabbanan tiknu. Let's not get all excited about it. Let's not negate the kiyum of tefillah of Kiddush DeOraisa and tefillah. So I gained two things from this Magen Avraham. Number one, I gained that the Magen Avraham had this tzvei dinim, as I call it, to bifurcate and split the mitzvah of Kiddush into two parts, one being DeOraisa and one being DeRabanan. And number two, I gain that if I read the Magen Avraham carefully, and I'm going to prove it to you, B'li Neder, he is saying that I can salvage the mitzvah DeOraisa without fulfilling the mitzvah DeRabanan as it's established by the Aish Knesset Gedolah b'makom suda and aliyah. And finally, before I let you go, I want to go all the way back to the Rambam, which, let's see, in your edition, that would be on page Tes. Okay, then, so take a look at on page Tes, and with this, we'll end the shir. And the Rambam writes, mitzvahs aseh min haTorah, lekadesh es yom haShabbos bidvarim. So here our lev is not sufficient. Shenemar zochus yom haShabbos lekadsho. Klomar zachreu, listen to the Rambam's language, shevach v'kiddush. It's almost identical to the Rashba, just we never would have seen this in the Rambam until we saw the Rashba. Shevach, which is kilus, and Kiddush, which means sanctity. Talk about the sanctity of Shabbos. And then if you fast forward to Halacha Vav, midivrei sofrim l'kadosh al yayin. So the Rambam himself has two mitzvahs of Kiddush, one DeOraisa, Zochus Yom Shabbos l'kadsho, b'dvarim. And what are those dvarim? Those dvarim are Zechira Shabbos v'Kiddush. And then he has a mitzvah DeRabanan of Kiddush al yayin. Very, very similar to what I believe is the Shitas of Rashba, and is absolutely clear in the Magen Avraham. But this we wouldn't have seen without the Rashba. On the previous page, he's got the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs, and there the Rambam seems to assume that DeOraisa Kiddush requires a bracha. Not like the Rambam in Mishnah Torah. Take a look. Mitzvah Kuf Nun Hey. Shetzivon lekadosh Shabbos o mitvarim. He has to recite verbally. B'knisaso, b'yitziaso. And this is a Pella, by the way. Nazkir bo Yitzias Mitzrayim. I never understood this. Again, please, if you could research this for me. Why is Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim so critical to Kiddush? Says Zochar Yom Shabbos l'kadsho. Maybe it's based on Gzeira Shav of Zochar because of Zechiras Mitzrayim. And Kiddush Hayom Umalaso Vehevdelo Mishar Hayom HaKol B'Ved of Avoim Hach. And you have to describe how this day of Shabbos is Lamala. It's superior. It's qualitatively superior and unique vis-a-vis the days that came before it and the days came after it. V'hu Sha'amro Yisparach. This is a classic language in the Sefer Mitzvah of the Rambam. Where is the source for this mitzvah? Zochres Yom HaShabbos l'kadsho, Klomar Zachreu v'kadsheu bibracha. And that really threw me for a loop that the Rambam adds the word bibracha. In other words, the Rambam holds that Kiddush DeOraisa is not just Shevach v'Hodoya, describing the mile of Shabbos and how it's different than all the days that came before it and afterwards, but it also requires a bracha. In the Mishnah Torah, I'm not sure. Because the Mishnah Torah isn't because he says so maybe the Rambam in Mishnah Torah likewise holds that the Torah requires a nusach habracha. I don't know. Joe?
Yitzias Mitzrayim isn't because again it's also Hivdalu. It's where we were Havdil B'nai Yisrael, that we were given the mitzvah of Shabbos. That's when we come. I don't follow
what you're saying. Because we left Mitzrayim, therefore we were given the mitzvah of Shabbos.
Then Yitzias Mitzrayim is when we were Yitzias Matan Torah, the whole bit. Yitzias Mitzrayim.
Yeah, but that's Tariag mitzvahs. How is there a relationship specifically to Shabbos?
That's because Shabbos is only a Jew's allowed to be Mekayim Shabbos. Otherwise, the Chayiv Misa.
So yeah, what does that have to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? I'm not
because
following your logic.
that's when we became Jews. Yetzias Mitzrayim is the whole concept of Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah and Eretz Yisrael. The whole that isn't that what.
So maybe we should say Zeichel Matan Torah Seinu in Kiddush.
Well, Yetzias Mitzrayim is when we were taken out. The nation was. No, you don't see that.
I don't see the relationship to Shabbos. Not so much. It's not so apparent. Can you get back to me on that and research it?